Welcome to this presentation in which I'll set out a number of models by which managers can increase the productivity in their organization through first the people and the competencies of the people that they employ, and second by the technology that those people are using, and therefore the technology in which the manager will invest. So first of all, let's get into some definitions. Productivity itself is the efficiency of a business activity. It's an efficiency measure. It's quite a well-known efficiency measure. It's used at the business level and it's used at the national level. Strictly, it's the output that the business produces per unit of input. An input is, of course, associated with the people that are doing that input, and the people are using technology, and therefore it's a measure of the way in which the people are exploiting the technology. It's not simply the total sales value of, for example, the nation or the company. It's the added value. So we have to remove from the calculations the cost of sales, the cost of stuff that we simply buy in and send out. At a national level, it's known as the GVA, gross value added, or the gross domestic product. These are complex measures, but they are nonetheless a financial measure of the added value, and they're usually expressed per hour worked. So the more hours you work, you divide it by you divide into the GVA or GDP, and the result of that is that you get a reduced GDP value. If you create the same wealth for fewer hours, then clearly your efficiency's gone up, and therefore your productivity's gone up. If we look then at productivity as a financial measure, so for example, at a national level, the GDP per capita, that is per person, GDP per person in UK and France currently sits at something like £36,000 per head, sorry, $36,000 per head. And if we take off the fact that there's quite a significant number of people who are not working, and therefore we look at it per producer, then we're looking at something like $50,000 per working person, which works out at something like £45,000 per working person. So that's the kind of aim, the kind of figure that we've got at the national level. If, of course, we divide that down, I'll do that in a moment once we've just discussed this slide. So productivity itself then is the sales value minus the cost of goods sold, because we're simply buying them in and sending them out. We're doing nothing to them. So it's the added value divided by the number of staff that are actually producing that added value. So productivity can be measured in terms of staff producing, in other words, direct heads, actual people who are producing. And most companies have marketers and maybe some managers, maybe some others who are not direct, they're so-called indirect, and they are overheads. So you have to be a little careful that you're measuring the right thing, but typically you might be looking at a measure per direct head. Productivity, just looking at that £45,000 per head for France and UK. What is slightly awkward and difficult, we're told, of course, that the French are more productive than we are. They have a higher productivity. It's not that they generate any more wealth, it's just that they don't work as many hours. And if you actually look at it and make the calculation, typically the UK, the British worker, is generating £26 per hour worked, whereas the French worker is generating £30 per hour worked. So in fact, to achieve £26, the French would have to work a fewer hours than we would. They typically would work a 32-hour week, whereas we are on average working a 36-hour week. So you can see there that what's important is getting the measure down to something that is useful. If we look at it in a benchmarking sense, we might look at an estate agent, and I've looked on the web, and typically some estate agents and surveyors are anywhere between £70,000 per head up to about £200,000 per head. And telecom consultants, they're in a different market. They can generate more wealth. They're typically somewhere around the £100,000 to £300,000 per person. Now, of course, a lot of people are generating a lot less than that, and there are people who are generating a lot more than that. So we need to talk as far as the nation is concerned at averages, but in terms of our own companies, we need to get down to looking at the pounds per hour wealth generated, or the £1,000 a year per person wealth generated as a measure of productivity. Now, people and technology have been inextricably linked forever, right since humans walked the planet. And you see this image here where we're using a piece of technology, in other words a rock, to crack a nut. And you can imagine the concept that if we're diligent at it for a particular rock size, we can do a good job. If we increase the rock size, maybe we can crack some more nuts. Maybe we increase the rock size to too great a size and we smash the nut to bits. But there is an inextricable balance here between the skills of the person in cracking this nut and the technology, the rock, that they're actually using. And so it has always been, right through the Industrial Revolution, right up to date. If you think about an electric drill, perhaps a 100-watt electric drill will take a certain time to drill a hole, where a 500-watt bigger electric drill will take shorter time to drill the hole. Typically, for example, you might be debating an upgrade to Office 20, from Office 2011 to Office 2016 as an enhancement. It has a lot more features, therefore you can do a lot more with it. And so you have this idea that for the same skills, we need some more skills, of course, in the case of the Office example, but for the same skills in principle, change the technology and you can do things faster, you can do things more efficiently. Conversely, if you increase the skill of the operator for the same technology. And so we have this concept of people and technology inextricably linked. So how then do we link the technology and the skill of the person to ultimately the efficiency of doing the job, and ultimately to the productivity of that person, the number of hours that they would need to work in order to create a certain wealth? And the answer is associated then with the performance, and we've got to go into a little bit of psychology to try and understand what performance comprises. What makes, and I mentioned the French were more productive than we were, what makes the French performance higher than the British performance? What makes ultimately the productivity higher? And of course, looking at the person here on the slide, we're looking at the technology that the person uses. Well, of course, the technology is influencing right back on the right-hand side here. That's influencing the job the person does, and the job will give that person variety. It will give them identity. They identify with it. It'll be significant to them. They have perhaps varying degrees of autonomy, and the job itself gives them some feedback, some kind of idea of what they're doing and the fact that they're doing a good job. That all boils up to motivate the person. So you can see instantly here, if you dumb down the job through technology, then the person is less motivated. Whereas if you allow the technology to enhance the person's well-being, the work time well-being, then they will be more motivated. So you have a little bit of work to do there, perhaps, and we have to be careful about not using technology to dumb down a job. But nonetheless, the job motivates, and you can see there that if the person is motivated, assume they are, then they will perform. But they will only perform if they've got the skills and the knowledge, and the experience, of course, gives them nothing tangible other than perhaps the confidence to go ahead. But we've got the skills and knowledge, and that's termed the human competence, the skills and knowledge in order to use that technology in order to do that job. So we can see instantly that we can change those skills and knowledge, and as a result of changing the skills and knowledge, we change the performance. That means we change the outcome of the job. And of course, the actual technology itself, the job outcome, is dependent on the technology. If you're using a particular drill, then you will only perform with that particular technology. So we can see from this idea of looking inside the psychology of the whole affair, we have to be careful we don't do the wrong things right back at the job, and we have to be sure that the people have the skills and knowledge in order to exploit the technology that they're using. And together that will give us the optimum performance, and the optimum performance, all other things being equal, will give us the highest productivity. In trying to enhance productivity, then, there are two principal variables. The first is the human competence, skills and knowledge. The second thing is the technology that's being used, and that instantly gives us the two possibilities for a manager. There's some kind of balance between increasing the human competence within the firm and increasing the technology that the people use in order to achieve the performance that's required, in order to achieve the outcomes. And ultimately then, having achieved those outcomes, you've then got the measure of productivity for those outcomes. In other words, the monetary value per hour worked, the monetary value per £1,000 of monetary value per annum, per operative, per person in the company generating that wealth. So we've got a balance, and we can do one or other things. We can put some more human competence into the equation, or we can back off the human competence, of course, and we'll see this later on, where we can actually reduce the human competence and increase the technology. And that's, of course, where everyone is concerned, that ultimately the human competence, and therefore the human input to the whole affair, will reduce, and technology will be hugely increased in order to get the same or better result. And so we've got this very clear idea of balance between these two variables. Now, so far, this is getting a little bit theoretical, the idea between balance between competence and technology. We need to get down to some definitions and try and get something that we can actually work with. In order to define competence, we need to not define it in terms of qualifications or even skills. We need to rise up a little and ask the question, what will the job holder be able to do? So the job holder shall be able to do something. The job holder shall be able to drill a hole. And instantly we say that, then we're assuming a particular technology. There is no job that we can do without technology, so therefore we have to define that technology. But given a certain drill, for example, we can drill a certain hole. The job holder shall be able to drill a hole. And that's the way in which we would define competence. We can increase that competence because we can define more exactly the number of holes per minute, per hour. We can define the quality of the hole, we can define the size of the hole, etc. And instantly we start to change those definitions. We need to also look at whether or not we need to change the technology. But that's a very simple, and this is straight out of the person specification that you would put down in order to define what somebody's going to do when they come into the role. In other words, this is something you would look for at recruitment. And of course, exactly the opposite is true of technology, or the same is true of technology, should I say, but from a technological perspective, the technology allows the user to be able to do something. Now, just in the same way as the specification we had for the competence, for the user, we've also, when we assumed some technology, similarly, the user shall be able to do something on the assumption that they have a certain technology available, a competence available. If they don't have the competence to use the technology, then clearly they will not be able to do what they're expected to do. So we can define technology by what it enables the user to do, what it allows that user to do with that technology, assuming a particular competence. And so we can see the balance again used when we define technology. And this combination of human competence and technology function gives us a capability. It gives the organization a capability. Ultimately, that capability gives the organization its competitive advantage. And if we take the capability and then calculate how much added value that capability is generating, we then divide it by the number of people, we divide it by the number of hours worked, then we're into those productivity measures. But the capability as a single thing, a single entity, single definition, is then the competence of the people multiplied by the technology that those people use. So fundamentally, in order to increase our productivity, we have to increase the capability of the organization, and that allows us ultimately to do more, but potentially also, and we'll look at this in a minute, to do more with less. So in effect, increasing the productivity. But also, while we're doing this, of course, we're increasing our competitive advantage by being able to enhance the capability. Now, the capability we've seen then in building all the story, we've seen that the capability is dependent on the technology function, the technology that we're buying, the function of that technology, and the way in which that technology is used by the staff, by the people in the organization using their competencies. So we've got this idea of capability as being the technology function plus the staff competencies. And I've added in there as well another factor, which is the concept of customer competencies, and we'll look at this in a few minutes, because one big movement today is to move the support, the product that the company supplies, move it more directly to interface to the customer. We'll see that in a moment when we look at the automatic teller machine example. But the essence of it is, in order to increase our capability, to increase the outcomes, to produce more, we have to look at our technology and our staff competencies, and as I say, also our customer competencies. Now, for those old enough to remember, and actually it isn't that many years, they'll remember the automatic, or the fact that banks originally had tellers. Of course, now we have this idea of the automatic teller machine, the ATM. Now, when you had a bank teller, you went into the banking hall, you approached the person who was the bank teller, who was undertaking that piece of work. They would be interfacing to a computer through a screen and keyboard, and they would say to you, what do you want to do in the bank, you want some money, so you tell them how much, you fill something in, they then enter those details on that computer. They are the operative in that sense, and they will then interface with the technology and they will give you your money. The revolution in teller or automatic teller machines was, of course, to do away with that operative, to realize that instead of the customer coming in to interface with an operative, the operative interfaces with the technology. The big change in capability was to introduce a new technology which allowed the customer to interface direct to the technology. Thereby, you actually did away completely with the teller. You did away with that job, and of course that is the classic example, the classic fear that we've all got about technology, that it will do without, it will do us away, it will negate the need for a human in the chain, and in fact you're going from customer to technology. Now that ignores the fact that someone has to program the ATM machine, somebody has to create it. There's a huge number of jobs created in manufacture for the ATMs, numbers of jobs created in design for the ATMs. We're talking here about the exploitation, the actual act of the customer interfacing and customer gaining service. But nonetheless, the ATM is a classic example of the advance of technology removing humans within that value-added chain. That hugely, provided the ATM network, of course, doesn't, the cost of putting the network in and running it doesn't outweigh the cost of the human teller. As long as that financial balance is in place, then introducing ATMs is an eminently sensible thing to do to increase the capability to effectively do more with less. And in terms of the actual example, then clearly the productivity would be increased because the number of people in the chain has been dramatically reduced, and the wealth generated in this process is the same. So we've taken the human out, and therefore the equation will be much enhanced, and our productivity in this particular activity would be much enhanced. This second example, you can imagine a call center. Perhaps it's a call center that processes and gives you quotations for insurance. So you dial up, you call the call center, a call center operative then answers and interfaces with a computer. And we all have come to accept, we've become accustomed now to the idea that these call center operatives are using computers to enhance the service they give. So they maybe give you more options for your insurance. They maybe give you maybe even less options. But of course, by using the technology, they themselves need less competence. And this is one of the concerns, of course, with the advance of technology, that the human operatives' competence would reduce dramatically, because they are entering what you want. You're saying you have a particular make of car, for example. Instantly the machine, the computer will recommend different policies, will ask prompt the operative to ask certain questions of you. All the while, of course, your voice is being recorded so that they have a record of the transaction. So we see here the idea that computers and the machines are enhancing the capability from an operator, but that the equation is operating, the technology is giving a greater technological function that then potentially permits the operative to have a lesser competence, although not necessarily, because of course what it can do in turn, by allowing the computer to aid the operative is then able to give a greater service, and in fact might need greater competency in order to match and use the overall function of the machine. So we can nonetheless see the human competence and the machine function in operation here. And depending on which way it goes, depending on the price of or the cost of implementing the machine, it may be that we are seeing an improvement, an enhancement in productivity. On the other hand, if we can answer more calls with fewer operatives, then the equation for productivity will operate, and we'll be doing more with less, and therefore our productivity will rise. In this third and final example, there's a huge predicted computerization in law now, in the provision of law services, in the provision of legal services. And this is perhaps something that is a little bit counterintuitive, because lawyers are supposed to be very, very knowledgeable people who have the capability of listening to a client's requirements and determining what they should do, what agreements they have to have in place, whether they should actually go ahead and launch a claim or whatever. But what we see here is the joining again of the human competence, perhaps lawyers using very little other than dusty books. The next step for them is that they have the competence amalgamated with technology. That is to say, technology has the ability to search for them. In the future, the technology will, of course, be able to mine data for them. The technology will, using algorithms, be able to develop argument for them. And therefore, the lawyer will spend much, much, much less time in digging into the dusty books, much less time in doing the routine job. But of course, what technology does then allow is the lawyer to be able to build a more valuable job. And remember back to the run from the job through the motivation into the performance. We're going to hit very much more motivated lawyers who have very much enhanced jobs as a result of all the drudgery being taken out of the job as a result of technology. Of course, what some people fear is that the technology ultimately would remove this. Conceptually, there is nothing wrong with, in fact, in exactly the same way as the ATM is now is accessed directly by the customer. Is there not the same model here, where the customer will access the law? The customer will access the legal computer. That's a debate, but more probably, what will happen is that the value of the lawyer's job will hugely increase, aided by the technology, and that, of course, will then give us a huge increase in the lawyer's productivity, because technology is providing a much enhanced service to the lawyer to enable the lawyer to have a much greater capability. And the important thing here is that computers are able to codify knowledge. It's not just a case of number crunching with an Excel spreadsheet or using it for a word processor. It's the idea that huge tomes of statute can be codified in a machine, searched by a machine, and the machine can develop knowledge from that information, and from, for example, the information on cases or even crime scenes or the likes. So we see quite an interesting idea here in law, where it's likely that lawyers will have to become more skilled, with higher qualifications, with greater competency, and they will use technology to remove the drudgery, if you like, from their job. We've seen then that there are two variables, if you like, technology and human competence. We therefore have, in any investment strategy, looking forward to increasing our capability and ultimately increasing productivity, we're either investing in the people to increase their competence, or we're increasing our investment in the technology. And that leaves us with perhaps two very high-level investment strategy possibilities. One is that the technology that we're going to use is an aid to human competence, the kind of the future legal idea that I mentioned a few moments ago. However, there's another option, and that is that technology becomes a substitute for human competence. Rather like the ATM, we take the human out, and therefore, of course, the productivity rises. In both cases, of course, the productivity rises. And this is I guess, the dilemma for most managers. Are they in the business of increasing the capability through increasing human competence and perhaps allowing greater technology to help build the capability? Or are we actually looking at automation? Are we actually bringing in artificial intelligence and automation as a substitute for human competence? And that gives us the kind of ATM scenario. So those are the two possibilities, and we'll look just in a moment at what that means in terms of investment. So we can either invest in technology, or we can invest in people, or we can do a bit of both. Prospectively, if we invest in technology, we could reduce the number of staff doing a job. That would increase our productivity. We could also invest in technology such that the technology aids the staff doing the job. That means our capability rises. We do more with the same. We could invest in people, simple as that. We could invest in people to make the people themselves more productive with whatever technology they're using. Or, of course, we can move towards staff giving a boutique service. And again, rather like the lawyers, where we expect them to have to greatly increase their own competence, because technology is going to do a lot of their job for them, and therefore they're able to provide I called it a boutique service. They're going to be able to provide a very greater level, a very increased level of capability. and therefore the productivity likewise will rise because they'll be able to charge more and the technology will be taking away. They won't need paralegals in the future. They will be doing the job with a machine. So we can see whatever route we take and whatever combination, we can see that we have a choice. Invest in technology, invest in people, or indeed invest in both. And the result will be, if we do that right, the result will be an increase in productivity coming from a reduced number of staff producing the same goods, or increase in the capability, and therefore as a result an increase in the sales value minus cost of goods, the added value that we're able to generate. And I want to look now at the one option that I'm particularly interested in, which is investing in people. Now, I don't want to spend much time on developing people, the increasing competence of people in this equation, because there simply isn't enough time. It's a separate subject. However, to give you a little bit of an inkling into how one might go about this, I'm going to now enter a tool which will give you an idea of how to look at the problem of increasing the capability as a result of increasing staff competence. The essence of staff development is establishing where the person is at this moment in time in terms of their competency, and competency is simply an individual competence, if you like, which then aggregates together. All the competencies add together to give an overall staff competence. And we need to know where the person is at that moment in time, and we need to know what they need to be, what their competence and individual competencies needs to be in some time in the future. And of course, remembering that this is for a given technology function, and we may also be increasing the technology function at the same time as hoping that we increase the staff competence, the individual worker competence. But the idea is very simple, and this is a simple tool. You can see it on our website under Tools. It gives you the ability to enter where someone is. So, for example, a practitioner, a supervised practitioner, a practitioner, expert, or even trainee, if most people are trainee in something. But to chart where they are today, to chart where they need to be tomorrow, and then there's a field here underneath each of these competencies in order to say how you will go about making the change. I don't want to go into this any further. It's simply the idea that these things are doable. You are endeavouring to lift the overall capability, as a result lift the productivity, and you're doing that by increasing one way or another staff competency, or a number of staff competencies, and you're going to do that by charting a development, charting and writing down a development plan. So overall, that's how you would go about staff development. And finally, here's an approach to looking at the technology function and the human competence across a whole organization. And that's the difficulty. It's one thing to sit and say, you member of staff, you need a particular increase in competency. That's at a micro level. What we need to be looking at in order to increase the overall capability, the overall productivity, is to look at the macro, the company level. And this is a very simple model. It's not meant to be for any particular company, and it is far, far, far from complete. But it gives the idea that here we have, let's say, for example, that turnover creates profit, profit creates an investment. We invest in product realization. That gives us methods of manufacture, methods of production. That generates a work breakdown, which is then goes to delivery, which then allows us to make things and deliver things. That's then implemented back round to invoicing, etc. We can look at those cycles, and this would be unique to every single business. Every business has a different model, and we would look at the various different functions within the company and look at the balance between technology and human competence. Firstly, where is it today? Where's it going to go? Where do we need it to go in order to increase those productivities? And it may even be that we have to get down to looking at productivity in financial terms in each area. So for example, what is the productivity of our delivery? In the same sense, we can measure the cost of that delivery, the added value of that delivery, and the number of people who are performing that delivery, and how we would wish that to change. Do we wish that to go to some degree of automation? Do we wish it to have greater technology? Would that be the solution, or is it simply a case of investing in people and increasing the competency of the individuals? And we can go around the whole model, looking at the productivity of each element and looking even at how we might change the flows in order to change the overall productivity measure. So that gives you an idea then of how you might go about looking at productivity, looking at capability on a macro company-wide level. And it's an extremely simple model there. For companies it would be somewhat more complex in looking at how to make change and where to direct the investment. So overall then, we've looked fundamentally at productivity. That's been the main focus. Along the way we've realized that productivity drives competitive advantage. It drives wealth. It drives the wealth that is brought into the company, the added value that's brought into the company. And if we escalate it to the national level, it brings the statement of the overall wealth of the country. I started with the idea that the French were more productive than we were, and in fact a French worker needs to work 32 hours to create the same wealth that a British worker would generate in 36 hours. So it actually, productivity also is a measure of how hard we work to create that wealth. But I've then also gone on to try to look at how we would increase our productivity, and I've argued that it has two elements to it: either staff competence or technology function, or some combination of both, and that we have the ability to do more with less. We can carry on with the same capabilities we have today, or we can grow our capability, and we can even bring the customer into that capability equation. In the end, what we do, the decisions we make, where we put the money, whether we put the money in technology or people, is a management decision. But in the end, productivity is one of the key business metrics, and it will be so for the foreseeable future. So this presentation has been about productivity and the way productivity is enhanced or will be enhanced in the future through people and technology. If you'd like more on this type of topic, then go to timelesstime.co.uk. You can subscribe there to our newsletter, and in the knowledge base there is a wealth of information similar to this on various different people management topics.